everybody. Announcements. You already knew, I'm sure, that February is Black History Month, but you may not have known that it's also Internship Month here at Erwin College. So there's a whole bunch of internship things, and I just wanted, I'm not going to go through them all, but just make you aware of opportunities for you to get internships by writing good cover letters, doing good interviews, etc. So there are workshops and drop-in days, and go to the, what is it, CCE for more information. We'll do some of this. Let's see, before we do that, I wanted to make some other announcements. So, quiz 1 is done. Well, you're done with it. I still have to work on it. But I will have it graded by the end, well, hopefully by the end of the day today. And so that means that it will be available to you to pick up at the biology office from Kim tomorrow. So you can pick up your graded quiz 1 tomorrow. The grades will be posted on Moodle as well. And the grading is funny because it's out of 50 points. So if you look at, if you look at the first number, it'll be, 40 out of 50. But the second number is, the percentage. Quiz 2 will be available tomorrow at the CST desk and is due Wednesday, next Wednesday, at 4:30 p.m. Not 11:30. If you go and try to take it at 10 o'clock at night, you're going to be locked out because the CST desk closes at 5 o'clock. So don't plan to do it Wednesday night. Plan to do it before 4:30 on Wednesday. If this is a problem for you because of your schedule and you were planning to be able to do it Wednesday night, before break on Thursday, let me know. You can try to make an arrangement. Questions about quizzes, quiz 1 and quiz 2? Okay, so,
yes, questions.
Question.
So, in terms of spelling?
No, I don't. If I know what the word you're trying for is, I give you credit.
And also on the muscle diagram, some of the muscles that went down into the hand,
yeah,
it was very faded out, so it was hard to tell where some of them would go.
That wasn't my experience, but I'll try to, when I'm grading them, I'll look at the copy as well as the answers.
Okay.
Let's see, where are we? What we're gonna be doing today is neuroanatomy. So we're gonna review some of the surface neuroanatomy terms that we talked about on Tuesday, and some of the mid-sagittal section terms that we reviewed on Tuesday. Then we'll transition to coronal neuroanatomy and do some learning there, and get into the cranial nerves. Hopefully have time to get into the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic branches of the autonomic nervous system, and if there's time, get into the hippocampus and learning and memory, long-term potentiation in the hippocampus. But if there's not time for that, we'll do that next Tuesday. Remember, and for those of you watching at home, please remember that the exam, the first exam in this course is the Tuesday after break. So next Tuesday is our last class before exam. And so and I will make time to have a question and answer period during Tuesday's class, during the, in order for you to get some more information about what would be coming up on the exam a week later. Okay, so let's play this game. But not this game, that one's too hard. Let's start with an easy one. Okay, so let's, who would like to start? You know the game. You pick a word and you use the laser and point to a dot, and then I move it and you get the happy ding or the sound. longitudinal fissure. This one. Yes. I had to think about it. Go ahead. Occipital lobe. In any direction, just pass it around. The central sulcus, good.
Is this the same?
Right, it's pointing to the two cerebral hemispheres. That's the frontal lobe. Okay? Well, okay, so I'm not going to just quiz you on that. This is the parietal lobe. It's too easy. Okay, so now let's go to the next one. Next picture. That's the cerebellum. That's the spinal cord. Okay. Which dot? Temporal lobe. You want this dot?
Yeah.
No.
Okay,
this is not well, I can see how you could say that. So this is if you're saying this is the temporal lobe, and you say this is the dot that's pointing to the temporal lobe, yeah, I can see how you're doing that, but this is the dot that's pointing to the temporal lobe. So this is the temporal lobe. Brainstem. All of these are parts of the brainstem.
The central sulcus is this.
The central sulcus is this one? Nope.
No?
Is that pointing to the sulcus? Is that the central sulcus?
Is this the central sulcus?
Yeah.
Yes. This is the central sulcus. Indeed it is. This is the lateral sulcus. So the lateral sulcus is the sulcus that separates the temporal lobe from the parietal and frontal lobes. Lateral sulcus, central sulcus. That's pointing to just some gyrus, right? That's which one did you choose? Yeah, right. So that's some gyrus. It's got a name, but it's a gyrus. Okay, cerebrum. It's just this is the cerebral cortex. So there's cerebral hemispheres or the cerebrum. Got different names. Okay, let's do the next one. Okay, so this is a midline, mid-sagittal section, lateral view. Structures. Who's got this? Who's got this? Okay, this one. Frontal lobe. Right. So thalamus, show me the dot. Yeah, thalamus. It's going that way. That's where, so everybody over here on this side of the room has had a turn. Okay, so we'll work over here. Okay, the cerebellum is right here. Yes. Okay, the spinal cord. And there.
occipital.
Occipital lobe. This one, is this the one you were pointing to?
That's the corpus callosum.
That is the corpus callosum. Hypothalamus. Below the thalamus.
What's the pons?
It's the pons.
This is the midbrain.
It's the midbrain.
This is the parieto-occipital sulcus.
That is the parieto-occipital sulcus. The sulcus between the parietal lobe and the occipital lobe. Oh, I gave you an answer. Go ahead, choose one, Michael. That's, what did you want for that one? Medulla oblongata, indeed. Medulla oblongata, these are the three components of the brainstem. Medulla oblongata, pons, and midbrain. Together, altogether, they are the brainstem. Okay, so I'll do the last two. The parietal lobe is this here, right? Because it's the lobe. Well, the parieto-occipital sulcus separates the parietal lobe from the occipital lobe, and we knew where the occipital lobe was, so that pretty much made it easy to know where the parietal lobe. And the central sulcus is not always visible in this sagittal section, but that would be the choice for that. Okay, so this is now an inferior view of the brain, looking at the brain from below. Let's try it. Cerebral hemispheres, right. The cerebral hemisphere is looking at from below. Let's just go lateral and then we'll scramble up through it. What do you want for that one? Cerebellum. Okay.
There you go. Oh,
Those are the olfactory tracts. So we saw, well, some of you have seen this in the lab, but some of you have not yet seen it. Olfactory bulb, olfactory tracts. Did you see that over here? Olfactory bulb, olfactory tracts. Yeah, that would be the temporal lobe, right? Oops. Temporal lobe over here. Yeah, so that would be the medulla. This one, is that the one you were pointing to? Yeah. So I'm going to choose one. Well, no, go ahead. It's getting easier and harder because you're... What's that one? Pons. I could see how you could get that, but this is the this is pointing to the pons. This is pointing to this is the pons. This is pointing to these things. It's not so clear. Optic chiasm is this one here? Indeed, yes it is. The optic chiasm, where the two optic nerves cross. Chiasm is Greek for cross.
I'm gonna see this one is the cranial nerves.
Yeah, so these things here are just pointing to some cranial nerves, and the pituitary gland is right below and posterior to the optic chiasm. Okay, good. So you did remarkably well. And so this is learning for the next quiz. The next quiz is semi-cumulative. So that is to say it could have material from quiz 1 and new material that as articulated in the key concepts sheet. All right, let's continue this game in a way. Going to coronal sections. Okay. Who would like to point to something and give me a name? So now it's getting harder because we are no longer, I'm not giving you the word bank. Did you have a question or, oh, so it'll get to you. I'm not giving you the word bank, I'm asking you to look at an image and give me the name of something. Now let me point out here, before I get to this one. So a coronal section, so this is anterior, posterior, superior, inferior. This is the front, anterior. A coronal section could be here, or it could be here, or it could be here, right? There is no midline for a coronal section. So this coronal section is going through the thalamus, but the one we're going to look at next is here and is going through an area anterior to the thalamus. So I just want to point out that in the first section we're seeing it's anterior to the thalamus. Okay, so there's a coronal section anterior to the thalamus. Let's do it over here so I can draw the names on the board. Can you find it over here?
That is the left ventricle.
The what ventricle?
Left ventricle.
Well, it
Oh,
would be
well,
the right,
right
but right and left ventricle are in the heart. This is the lateral ventricle.
Oh.
These are the lateral ventricles. So yes, this would be the right lateral ventricle. But I won't accept right ventricle for this A and P class because that's in your heart. This is the lateral ventricle. Okay? Nope, I told you that we are anterior to the thalamus, so that is not the thalamus. So choose something else, if you don't know the name of that. Okay, I would accept that as a name. This is some sulcus. That is a structure, it has some name, but you know, we haven't named that one. That is a sulcus. Yeah, what's the name of the line that divides the two hemispheres? Somebody help him out.
Longitudinal fissure.
Longitudinal fissure. If you use longitudinal sulcus, I will accept it because it is in fact a sulcus, but longitudinal fissure is its name. Good. Okay. That is not the third ventricle. Okay, so this gray stuff is called gray matter. That is a term that I would accept on a coronal section. I would accept it on a sagittal section, but I won't accept it on a superficial dissection, right? Just to be clear, I will accept it in a section, but I won't accept it as a label for a superficial image. Yeah. So that would be white matter. Yeah, so. What is in the gray matter? Dendrites, cell bodies, synapses. What is in the white matter? Myelinated axons connecting these 80 billion neurons to each other.
This is one
That is what?
One gyrus.
Okay. Sure, I'm just gonna label it here. This is a gyrus. So this is a sulcus, this is a sulcus, that's a gyrus. Let's start with another color. Okay, who's got the temporal lobe? So this here is the temporal lobe in coronal section. Oh, I don't think we can see the hypothalamus in this section. We're too far forward to see. We can't see the thalamus, so we can't see the hypothalamus.
This is gonna be, is that a part of the gyrus?
Well, that's another gyrus, but I would only accept the label once. If you call this gyrus and this a gyrus and this a gyrus and this a gyrus and this a gyrus, you're all right, but you only get one.
Do you know thalamus?
No, we're in front of the thalamus, so we can't see the thalamus.
Cool. And this, like, cerebellum?
Nope, we're too far forward to see the cerebellum. Okay, let me ask you, so I'll ask you a targeted question. What is this? Too far forward to see the midbrain. Somebody help her out. What is this? Corpus callosum. Two L's in callosum or one? Corpus callosum. Okay, so it's getting harder. Now, so I'll ask you targeted questions. Is that, unless you haven't,
I was gonna try something.
Okay, try something.
Should we be able to see the frontal lobe appear somewhere?
The what?
The frontal lobe appear somewhere, is it too
Ah,
far
okay.
forward?
I would accept that this, because I said this section is forward, this section is forward. Yeah, so I would accept frontal, it might be in the parietal lobe, depending on how far forward it is, but I would accept frontal lobe as a correct answer for, in that case. Jacob, you have?
Yeah, the lateral fissure.
Okay, good. The lateral fissure. Or the lateral sulcus, separating the frontal or parietal lobe from the temporal lobe. Okay. Two more on this one oh no, more than two. But they're getting harder.
I don't think I have one.
Okay, does anyone, now let me just, who's got the laser? Do you have something that you would like to
I
point
don't.
to? Okay. Can you name that?
Midbrain?
No, we're too far forward to see the midbrain, it would be down here. Anybody? The thing that separates the two ventricles, the two lateral ventricles. There's a name for it.
There is.
Is it the lateral sulcus?
Nope, the lateral sulcus is way down here.
It's the thing, it's not the longitudinal.
Nope, it's not the longitudinal fissure either, because the longitudinal fissure separates the two hemispheres of the brain. It is not the third ventricle. Third ventricle is right there. That's the third ventricle. So there's the third ventricle.
So what are you pointing to?
I'm pointing to this.
Oh, that, oops.
What is this? It's called the septum pellucidum. Septum pellucidum. It's the membrane that separates the two lateral ventricles.
We saw
Septum
that
pellucidum.
in lab, right?
We haven't seen it in the lab.
What was the cartilage divided?
That is called the dura mater. The dura mater has been removed from this table. There's no dura mater here. Okay, so does anybody know, so now it gets harder but I want to teach you. So instead of quizzing you, I will teach. So these gyri here have a name. They're the gyrus right above the corpus callosum. They are the cingulate. No, that's one way wrong. Gyrus. Okay, the cingulate gyrus. So you can name the gyrus right above the corpus callosum, and that's the cingulate gyrus. Those are the cingulate gyri. Okay, something else that we could label here. This structure here, which you want to call the thalamus because you're saying it's the gray matter in the middle, but I've told you we're too far forward for it to be the thalamus, is called the caudate nucleus. And I'm naming it because we're going to see that as an important component in motor control later, a few weeks from now. The gray matter below the caudate nucleus in this section is called the putamen. And again, motor control. And this white matter between the caudate and the putamen has a name, and it's called the internal capsule. And that is, it's white matter mostly, axons of the motor system. When we move, we're using neurons that send their axon through the internal capsule. So it gets challenging. Some of them are easy, some of them are less easy. Yes, question?
On the key consequence, is that just not?
Another one left. Yeah, we haven't seen the globus pallidus yet.
What is the caudate nucleus specifically referring to out of those four giant circles?
These two are the caudate.
Okay, so the ones below one.
These two are the putamen in this section.
What do those do?
Motor.
Sorry, you just said that.
It's motor control.
Wait, so the putamen is also part of motor control, or is that just?
Yes, both of them.
Okay. That makes sense, so that's the only one.
So we're going to see that, we have complex movement. A lot of our brain is dedicated to initiating and controlling movement. Okay, so let's do this a little bit. So on the one hand, we could spend a lot of time doing some of the same names. So this is what's the name of this section? Coronal. This is a coronal section a little bit further posterior. So a little bit further back, just a little bit. So if you only go a little bit, you can imagine that the names don't change very much, but I have to erase everything because the picture has moved just enough to make all the labels that were from the first picture wrong. But we could go through these, but in the interest of time, let's not. Let me show you the new ones. Well, let me just show you some of the old ones and some of the new ones, right? So here's the corpus callosum, and here's the septum pellucidum, and here are the lateral ventricles, and here is the third ventricle. Yeah, thank you. Caudate, there's the caudate in this section. So the caudate is the one sort of next to the lateral ventricle. Is that true in the previous slide? Previous slide? I forgot to turn it on. Yeah, the caudate is next to the lateral ventricle. So, at least in these sections, in anterior to the thalamus, the caudate is the one next to the lateral ventricle. The caudate is the one next to the lateral ventricle. What's the name of this white matter between the caudate and these other gray matter? It's the internal capsule. Yeah.
As far as where the putamen is, it looks like, well, compared to the old photo, it looks like it's further, like.
Well, remember, everything is curved, so it's a three-dimensional structure, so if this is the putamen here, it turns out this is the putamen here, and this is the globus pallidus. Both, so there's globus pallidus 1 and globus pallidus 2. We're just going to call it globus pallidus. Everybody with me?
So what have you named them?
Caudate, putamen, globus pallidus. Do I need to do that again? Caudate, putamen, globus pallidus. Together, these structures are called the basal nuclei or the striatum, and they're all part of motor control. Caudate, putamen, globus pallidus. Basal nuclei, striatum, motor system. And so I could, here's the lateral sulcus, and here's the longitudinal sulcus. So a lot of the things that were on the previous slide are also shown in this one, but I'm highlighting the ones that are new. Questions about this section? Hayden?
Sorry, what were the new ones that you introduced?
Well, the only two that were new were the globus pallidus.
Okay, those are the only.
Yeah.
So only what's been pointed out so far is like we are responsible for, like, there's obviously some
If it's,
random.
again, use your key concept list to know what you are responsible for. Everything I've said today, I think, is on the key concepts list. Third ventricle might not be on your key concepts list, in which case it wouldn't be, I would give you credit for a correct answer if you got it right, but I might not require you to know third ventricle. Isabel?
Could you just point to the
Septum pellucidum is the structure between the two lateral ventricles. So this is the septum pellucidum. Let me work, since I'm not drawing on the board, let me work over here to help this side of the room a little bit. Can you still see from here? Septum pellucidum, lateral ventricles. Other questions?
What was the name of, like, what does the
Putamen?
putamen and the globus, what does that all make up?
The name of the caudate, putamen, and globus pallidus are the basal nuclei also called the striate. You might know that striatum, striate means what's the word I'm looking for in English? Striated, striped. Well, striped.
Why is that internal capsule not part of the basal nuclei?
Is what?
Why is that internal capsule not part of the basal nuclei?
Because the nuclei refers to gray matter. Just that word, nucleus, refers to gray matter. Okay, let's do another one. So we're going to go a little further back. Now we're going posterior. So we're going a little further back. And now we're going to see thalamus. So somebody with a laser. Somebody with the laser, point to the thalamus in this section. Josh? Okay. The thalamus, it is a place where signals are processed. Processing occurs in dendrites. What color are we looking for in the thalamus? Gray matter.
Also, the corpus callosum is right up here.
That's the corpus callosum.
This is, I guess that's.
That is the thalamus. That's the thalamus. Okay, corpus callosum. You know, the lateral ventricles have gotten so small that we don't even see them. Oh, here they are, but there's no septum pellucidum here. We've gone too far back to see the septum pellucidum. So this gets a little hard to see. Just the image is light. But what do you suppose that is? Somebody guess what that is below the thalamus. Knowing what you know from the sagittal section, because you got it right in the sagittal section, now apply your three-dimensional knowledge to what's below the thalamus in a coronal section.
Is it supposed to be the hypothalamus?
That would be a pretty good guess, but not. Since the hypothalamus is both below and anterior to the thalamus, the hypothalamus is out here.
Oh, okay.
And not in this section, but I can see where you're coming from. What is below, Kendra? The midbrain. So this is the thalamus, and this is the midbrain. Okay? Now, knowing that that's the midbrain, what is this in this section? Anybody? Pons. So this would be the pons. And this down here is the medulla oblongata.
Is the size of the pond bigger than the
It is bigger than the midbrain.
Because in sagittal infections, eligible for the brain is bigger than
Not really. I don't think so. Pons has that big bulge. Pons looks pretty big. What is the name of this lobe? Temporal lobe. What is the name of, what descriptor would we say is, this is the, I'm trying to be quiet. This is the lateral temporal lobe, right? Lateral, medial. Lateral, medial, the medial temporal lobe. Somebody who's taken brain and behavior or behavioral neuroscience, is there anybody of those in the room? What is this in the medial temporal lobe?
Is that the suspension?
Begins with an H. Hippocampus. That's the hippocampus. In the medial temporal lobe. Memory learning. You are using your hippocampus now big time, I hope. Okay, so we see gyri and sulci, we see gray matter and white matter, we see the cingulate gyrus here, we see the longitudinal fissure, we see all those things we saw in the previous ones, but it's your job to reinforce your knowledge of what I just used. Are there others? Oh, before I go on, I will not ask you I will not ask you to identify this, but these two structures right here are called the lateral geniculate nuclei of the thalamus, and we're going to see that name again when we talk about the physiology of the visual system. So now you've seen them anatomically, so I'm not circling them because I would not ask you to identify them on an exam or quiz. Lateral geniculate nuclei. Lateral geniculate nuclei. Visual system. Okay, let's do one more of these. At least one more. We are moving posterior. We're moving posterior. We're moving backwards, right? Now we're in the slice. Let me just orient you again. I'm going backwards in time here. So this is through the frontal lobe, and now we're moving a little further back. So the first section was here, the second section was here, the third section was here, right? We're moving the fourth section. I don't know if I got that right, but you see what we're doing. We're moving posterior in each of these sections. First one. This is the one we just did. Okay. So, what is this? Cerebellum. This is the cerebellum. So what is this that it's connected to? What's the bridge between the cerebellum and the rest of the brain? Bridge, pons. Pons. This would be the pons. The midbrain would be up here. What is this structure here in the medial temporal lobe? That's the hippocampus in this section. The cerebellum has its white matter, just like the cerebral cortex has its white matter. The cerebellum has its gray matter, just like the cerebral cortex has its gray matter. It looks a little different, but it's still gray matter. There are some other structures here that we could name, but I think I'm not absolutely sure, but I'm not absolutely sure. I don't want to. I know that the cerebellum is connected to the pons. So this is the pons. If you circled this as the midbrain, I would accept it, but I'm not positive it's correct, so I'm not going to circle. Above the pons would be the midbrain, and below the pons would be the medulla oblongata. Yes?
Which part did you say was the cerebral cortex?
Cerebral cortex. That's the right hemisphere of the cerebral cortex. Other questions? So I could say, where's the, I could ask, where's the cingulate gyrus? Who's got the, does anyone out here have the laser? Yeah. That's the cingulate gyrus. Where's the, something new? Where's the hippocampus? I taught you that a minute ago. Anybody want to point to the hippocampus? Exactly, the hippocampus. So let's move on. That's too easy because you just learned it. The challenge is to be able to remember it tomorrow. So I want to point out that all of that white matter are axons, and some of them are specific, and they will have names. So for example, this white matter that is colored blue in this diffusion tensor imaging image is part of the motor control system. And there's actually a crossing over that happens in the medulla. Right on here, the fibers cross over. So this is, it's got a name, It's called the pyramidal tract, and it's part of the motor control system. But I would not quiz you on this except for easy ones. What is this? That's the corpus callosum, white matter crossing the midline. That might be the only easy one on this image. But the reason I put this image up is to remind us that white matter is not just glob, it's axons. Here are the URLs for the the Bing game that we played at the beginning of class, so they're available to you to play at home when the PowerPoint is available on Moodle, which I think it is already. So let's take a short break and we'll get to the cranial nerves. Let's take a short break now. Cranial. So what view of the brain is this? An inferior view of the brain. Anterior, posterior, left, right. So, and so a three-dimensional object has been collapsed down onto a two-dimensional image. So what is this? What is this thing right here? That's the medulla. Here's the pons. Here's the optic chiasm. Here's where the pituitary gland would be. Right? So there's some abnormalities here because we're squishing some three-dimensionality down into two dimensions.
Is the pons that big?
In this, it's a cartoon, so it's exaggerated, but you could imagine the pons being drawn this way. So what are these? The lobes of the cerebellum. What lobe is this? Temporal lobe. Good. So, good. So, and what lobe's up there? Frontal. Do we see the longitudinal fissure? Yeah. Do we see the central sulcus? Not in this image. We see the cranial nerves. Some of them are easy. The olfactory cranial nerves are easy to see. The optic nerve and the optic chiasm is easy to see, even if it weren't colored green. But other than that, especially in real life on the brain, it gets harder. So I will not, repeat, not ask you to label the cranial nerves in an image like this or any other cartooned image of the inferior view of the brain. But I do want you to know the cranial nerves and their functions. There it is. So there are 12 cranial nerves, and they each have names. Some books refer to them as their Roman numeral, so cranial nerve X. It's not X, it's 10. Cranial nerve 10 is the vagus nerve. Cranial nerve V, that's V, that's 5. Cranial nerve 5 is the trigeminal nerve. Okay? So if I ask you to name the cranial nerves and you say, oh, cranial nerve 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you don't get any credit. That's not good enough. These are the names of the cranial nerves that I want you to know. And this gives you some information about their function. Here is the mnemonic that I use to remember the cranial nerves in order. So I just remember this sentence. Old Oprah's occupation, tropical trips aboard famous vessels, glamorous vacations, accumulating pipe. Apologies to Oprah. Okay? There's other mnemonics, you can find them online, but I like this one because it uses not only the first letter, famous for facial, it uses the second letter, famous for facial, because some of the letters are the same, right? Old for olfactory, Oprah for optic, occupation for oculomotor. So I find this one extremely helpful because it's not just, it's old Oprah's occupation. Anyway, you're welcome to do whatever it takes for you to learn these. So the olfactory nerve, and then there's another mnemonic for learning whether they are sensory nerves So the olfactory nerve is carrying sensory information from your nose to your brain so that you can smell things. So it's a sensory nerve. The oculomotor nerve is a motor nerve that carries information from your brain to your eyes, oculo, to help you. This is one of the 3 nerves that helps you move your eyeballs around. So some of them are sensory, some of them are motor, and some of them carry both sensory and motor information.
So when you're asking us to know the function of all of these, do you want just sensory or motor?
Well, I want sensory. So a correct answer for the function of the olfactory nerve would be a sensory nerve carrying smell information from the nose to the brain. Optic, a sensory nerve carrying sensory information from the eyeballs, from the retina to the brain. Question?
In the text or in the workbook, there is like a lot more information where it is like general. or
Yeah,
useful
right.
or-
That's not required.
Okay.
So it's helpful sometimes, but it's more information than you need. So that what Brittany's referring to is the coloring book. The coloring book has more information than you need. Use this slide and your key concepts list as a guide to know what you need to know. So the oculomotor nerve is a motor nerve carrying information from the brain to the eyeballs, controlling movement of the eyes. The trochlear nerve is another motor nerve that controls movement of the eye. So the oculomotor and the trochlear, and in fact the abducens. These are the 3 nerves. Oculomotor, trochlear, and abducens nerve control movement of the eyeballs. And they are 1, 2, they're all motor. The trigeminal nerve carries both sensory information from the face and motor information to the jaw. The facial nerve carries both sensory information to the face and motor information to the muscles of facial expression. When I smile, I'm using my facial nerve. When I pout, I'm using my facial nerve. Vestibulocochlear is a sensory nerve. You can imagine, where does it come from? Those of you who know what the cochlea is. This is in the ear. This is carrying auditory information, sensory auditory information from the ear to the brain. Here it gets a little tricky now. Glossopharyngeal is referring to the throat. So this controls movement in the mouth and sensory information in the throat and the mouth. Vagus is we'll see the vagus a lot when we talk about the parasympathetic nervous system, but it turns out it's a both. It carries both motor information and sensory information to the whole body. Vagus goes to the whole body. The word vagus it's the same root as vagabond. It means wanderer, because axons from the vagus nerve wander all over the body. The accessory nerve is the nerve that controls the trapezius and the supraspinatus, so upper shoulder. It's a motor nerve. And hypoglossal, under the tongue, controls the tongue. So use this mnemonic to learn the names of the cranial nerves, and use this mnemonic. Some say money matters, but my brother says big brains matter more, as the mnemonic to know whether they're sensory or motor. So if you can remember this mnemonic and this mnemonic, you're 3/4 of the way, and then the names are usually pretty helpful. Olfactory, optic, oculomotor. Some of the names are really helpful. So they tell you whether it's whether it's motor in the eye or motor in the face. Okay? It requires work. I'm teaching you, but the learning comes from just working with it. And my recommendation is write it out, self-test, whatever it takes to learn the 12 cranial nerves. Okay.
So just to be clear, we do need to know the specific functions.
Yeah. If you say motor, you'd get if you said motor for a motor nerve, I would accept it as partial credit. If you say motor that controls the eyes, that's full credit for the oculomotor. questions about cranial nerves? It is sort of a rite of passage for people taking anatomy to just, confront some, as you already are confronting, some detailed anatomy of the muscles of the forearm. This is sort of the same order of magnitude of difficulty with cranial nerves. It's a lot of memorization, and you'll have to trust me that I'm not asking you to learn, the thing that's in the coloring, all the information in the coloring book. I'm not asking you to know everything I could be asking you to know in an anatomy class, because I'm trying to target your learning to the things that I think are most important. Okay, so let's talk about some other nervous systems. So when you think about the nervous system, you're probably thinking about the central nervous system, the brain, the spinal cord. Those are the two subdivisions of the central nervous system. You might think about the peripheral nervous system in terms of sensory and motor neurons, right? Neurons from my fingertips bringing sensory information to my brain. Neurons in my spinal cord controlling my arms. Sensory and motor peripheral nerves. You're aware of them. If you think about what your brain does, you're aware of the CNS and you're aware of the somatic division of the peripheral nervous system. But you may not be aware of the autonomic, unconscious component of the peripheral nervous system called the autonomic nervous system, which has two subdivisions, the sympathetic nervous system of the autonomic division and the parasympathetic nervous system of the autonomic division. So sympathetic and parasympathetic are the two branches of autonomic, and the sympathetic is the fight or flight response. When you're stressed, your sympathetic nervous system is highly activated, and when you're relaxing, rest and digest, your parasympathetic nervous system is working, and your sympathetic nervous system is not. So here is a cartoon of the autonomic nervous system. Remember, so let's start with sympathetic. Fight or flight. Stress. You probably already can think your respiratory rate increases. You start to breathe a little faster and shallower because you're stressed, nervous. Your heart rate increases. You can feel your heart beating faster. You can probably feel your heart beating stronger. So your heart is changed. You might not know it, but your digestive system is changed. The sympathetic nervous system inhibits the digestive system and allows the parasympathetic nervous system to activate digestion. So the parasympathetic, so let's just go to the cartoon now. You can see the sympathetic nervous system is activating the heart, activating respiratory systems. So these blue dotted lines are neurons from the sympathetic nervous system to the organs that are controlled by the sympathetic nervous system. The organization of the sympathetic nervous system is that spinal neurons whose cell bodies are in the spinal cord, innervate ganglia. Ganglia are where they're like nuclei. They're gray matter, but ganglia are where neurons connect with each other, out in the periphery. So these are ganglia connections outside of the spinal cord. And neurons from these ganglia innervate the body. The heart, the lungs, the digestive tract, the eyes. You may know that in the activation of the sympathetic nervous system causes your pupils to dilate. So the parasympathetic nervous system innervates the same things, right? So what the sympathetic nervous system turns on, like your heart rate when you're stressed, your parasympathetic nervous system turns off when you're resting and digesting, right? So we have a positive and negative control. Stress activates heart rate. Let's just use heart rate as a good example. Stress activates heart rate. Resting and digesting inhibits the heart rate. You don't need to be pumping the heart so much if you're relaxed. Stress activates respiratory rate, dilates airways, allowing more air to get into your lungs. The parasympathetic nervous system does the opposite. Stress inhibits digestion and urination, that's the kidney, and resting and digesting activates the digestive system and urination. Start.
So then, when you're stressed and your sympathetic system kicks in, so then eating when you're stressed is just...
That's why it's you might get in, if you eat a big meal while you're highly stressed, you might get some digestive discomfort, indigestion. I mean, your body can do it. It's not like you won't be able to digest it, but it's not optimal to be digesting when you're highly stressed. It's not what you're designed for. Maybe.
I've heard that if you're stressed for enough portions of your life for long enough, you can have the stress response sort of start partially on. Is that true?
Yeah, there can be chronic. I mean, we are designed not designed. We have evolved into in a world where stresses were short. I need to escape that saber-toothed tiger. I fell and I'm injured. I need to survive this blood loss, right? Short-term stress. We have not evolved in a situation where, oh my God, I've got a AMP quiz next week. I'm so stressed about for a whole week, right? That's not what we evolved towards. And so these systems are activated by the kinds of stress that they were not evolved to handle. And so that gets to Aiden's point that we can develop chronic syndromes of chronic stress. Yeah. Now let's take this apart here. Some of you may remember from self-phys. What is this little V thing here? These little V's, these little bifurcations supposed to indicate? I'm sorry? A what? Nope. No, this is not necessarily inhibitory. This little V is supposed to indicate a synapse. It could be excitatory or inhibitory. These V's are, so so in self-phys we used an arrow and a bar. So in self-phys we used an arrow to indicate a positive control and a bar to indicate a negative control. And now we're using this image to indicate a synapse. So this is the presynaptic terminal of a synapse, and here is the cell body of the postsynaptic cell. Maybe the dendrites. Pre-post synapse. You'll see this cartoon a lot. Whoops. So here's a neuron. Let's just trace this neuron here. Here's a neuron. Well, let's trace this neuron. Here's a neuron from a ganglion of the sympathetic nervous system that innervates the heart. And there's this is indicating synapses, and not just one, there's probably 1,000, 10,000 synapses of these kinds of neurons innervating the heart. Here are synapses from the sympathetic ganglia innervating the salivary glands. You may know that if you're stressed, you get dry mouth because it inhibits salivation. Here's a neuron who doesn't, so here's a neuron that goes into these ganglia, makes a synapse, and then there's another neuron that carries this information to the body. Here's a neuron that just sort of goes through a ganglion. Doesn't synapse here. There's no V here. doesn't go through, I mean, goes through the ganglion, and then synapses at another ganglion to, and then the postsynaptic cell innervates the organ. But over here on the parasympathetic nervous system, well, let me go to the cartoon. So the parasympathetic nervous system has its bases. What do you suppose these Roman numerals are? Cranial nerves. So here's cranial nerve 10, the vagus nerve, wandering all over the body. Cranial nerve 10, wandering all over the body. But it's not the only cranial nerve that carries parasympathetic nerve information. So here's a cartoon that I think will help. So let's go back, I want to go back 2 slides. So part of this is looking at the somatic motor division, and part of it is looking at the autonomic division. In the somatic motor nervous system, the cell bodies are in the spinal cord. So you can label your slide. Did I give you this one as a handout? Yeah. So this is gray matter of the spinal cord. What is this? A myelinated axon. Yeah. Cell body of the spine of the somatic nervous system, myelinated axon. What's this? This thing right here? Presynaptic terminal. What's the function of the presynaptic terminal? Neurotransmitter release. The neurotransmitter at this synapse is acetylcholine. Acetylcholine interacts with nicotinic acetylcholine receptors to activate muscle. We'll talk about that much more in the motor system. Now let's look at this autonomic nervous system. In the typical sympathetic, so here we are in the sympathetic neuron. The neuron in the spinal cord innervates a ganglion. The first axon is short because it's going from the spinal cord to the ganglion. It's going from the spinal cord to the ganglion. That's in the cartoon. There are some exceptions to this, obviously. From the spinal cord to the ganglion. Now I'm using the language, I'm immersion approach. The preganglionic ganglion, preganglionic neuron has a short axon in the sympathetic nervous system. The postganglionic axon in the sympathetic nervous system has a long axon. The postganglionic neuron of the sympathetic nervous system usually has a long axon. The neurotransmitter that is released at the ganglion in the sympathetic division is acetylcholine. Nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. What does acetylcholine do to the postganglionic neuron? Excites it or inhibits it? Activation of release of neurotransmitter here does what to this neuron? Activates it. Because nicotinic acetylcholine receptors are stimulatory. Sodium influx, depolarization, more action potentials. Release of the neuron, I'm not going to take any more questions, I want to make sure I get through this. The neurotransmitter of the postganglionic neuron at the target, heart, eyes, whatever, is norepinephrine. In the parasympathetic nervous system, the preganglionic neuron has a long axon. The preganglionic neuron has a long axon. The neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. The receptor is nicotinic. So this is an excitatory synapse. But in the parasympathetic nervous system, the neurotransmitter released by the postganglionic neuron is not epinephrine or norepinephrine, it's acetylcholine again. And the receptors are metabotropic or muscarinic, and they are almost always inhibitory. Well, not almost. They're often inhibitory. Remember, we have GQ-coupled muscarinic, and we have GI-coupled muscarinic. So this slide, what does this slide do? It cartoons these important nervous systems. It tells you what the neurotransmitter is at each of these synapses, and it tells you the name, the type of receptor: nicotinic, adrenergic, nicotinic, muscarinic, nicotinic. So what do I want to do here? I will take a question. Are there questions about this cartoon of the autonomic and somatic nervous systems, the somatic branch of the peripheral nervous system? Hey,
What's the benefit of having a longer axon in this, in the post-synaptic?
yeah, I mean, why did we evolve it this way? I don't know.
The post-ganglion.
So whether neurons inhibitory or excitatory is based on the receptor?
Exactly. That's a good, I'm glad you said that. Acetylcholine can either be excitatory or inhibitory depending on the receptor. Acetylcholine here is excitatory because of the nicotinic receptor. Acetylcholine is excitatory here because of the nicotinic receptor. Acetylcholine is excitatory here because of the nicotinic receptor. Acetylcholine is often inhibitory here because of the varying metabotropic receptors. Muscarinic, G protein coupled, remember. So I hate this figure because it uses the same image for an ionotropic receptor as it does for a GPCR, but you know that well, you should know that nicotinic is not the same as muscarinic. Other questions? So I think that's a lot. We covered a lot of ground today. Even though I wanted to get to long-term potentiation in the hippocampus, I'm not even going to try to do it in 3 minutes, which is no way. I do want to just point out that your coloring book is asking you to learn the names of the spinal cord sections, and here they are. So that is also something to know. It is on your key concepts list. It is in the coloring book. To know that we have cervical, thorax, lumbar, sacral, and coccygeal sections of our spinal cord. We'll talk about the inputs and outputs to the spinal cord and the hippocampus on Tuesday. Okay. See some of you this evening.